What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel for a true crime video. I have not filmed a true crime video in a really long time. I think the last true crime video that I uploaded was my collaboration with Joshua Miles, which was all the way back in June. So yeah, and this is also my first video of 2020. My heart is beating so fast right now because I'm so nervous to be filming. I'm so nervous to be back on this platform. I don't know why. I feel so awkward right now. So I'm really sorry if these next couple of videos are a little bit awkward. I'm just trying to get back into the swing of things, trying to get back into a filming schedule as if I ever had one. So if you do like this video, if you're interested in true crime, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more videos like this. So like I said, today's video is a true crime video and it is about South Africa's first ever documented serial killer, colloquially known as the insurance killer. Being that it is the first documented serial killer case, it is also the oldest case that I have and probably will ever cover on this channel. As such, there is very limited information available, so this video is not going to be as long or as detailed as my previous true crime videos have been. Regardless of it being a pretty old case, I still want to give my usual disclaimer that by making this video, I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the family or the victims affected by this case. This video is purely for educational purposes and to give the audience more information about this case. Our case begins sometime in the year 1880 with the birth of Pierre Basson in Claremont, which is a suburb in Cape Town, South Africa. Today, Claremont is notoriously known for the recently decommissioned post office where 19-year-old University of Cape Town student UYINENE was brutally raped and murdered there in August of last year. So just a quick tangent. UYINENE's case is particularly jarring. Like I mentioned, it happened in August. And in South Africa, August is when we celebrate Women's Day, which is on the 9th of August. And the whole month of August is considered to be Women's Month. So being that she was murdered during this pretty significant time in South Africa, it was not only alarming but quite infuriating, and she subsequently became, for lack of a better word, the poster child or the face of gender-based violence in our country. And it's pretty disturbing to see the rate of femicide that happened. It was brought to light then. For her to have passed away the way that she did, it was emotionally traumatic for a lot of women in South Africa. It opened a wound that a lot of people had been trying to close, because it made us face our reality that as women in this country we are not safe. Okay, I don't want to go too much into detail about UYINENE's case, so I'm just going to leave it here. But I also want to mention that her family has since started a foundation in her name, and I'll leave the details to that in the description box below. So please, if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. Going back to Claremont in 1880, Basson was the oldest of 4 children. He had 2 younger brothers as well as a younger sister. In his youth, he was known as the town troublemaker, even being described by Inspector Easton, who would be the police officer that would later investigate his death, as a scoundrel from infancy. From a young age, he was a pretty disturbed individual, displaying signs that are now considered to be the predetermining factors to the making of a serial killer. He was a pretty sadistic child. What he would do is that he would catch birds and he would torture them to death. Not only did he catch birds and torture them to death, but he would also catch cats, and he would cut the legs off of these cats so he could watch them writhing in agony and pain. He did all of these horrific, horrible acts before he was even a teenager. His depraved manner was not only limited to animals, however, and at just the age of 12, he attacked a local boy with a knife. By the time he was a teenager, he had earned himself a reputation in the town as a local thief. As a result of his violence, his depravity, his criminality, he did not get along with his family. They did not have a good relationship at all. all of his troublemaking, it caused a lot of conflict in his family home. He had no regard for other people. He didn't care about how his actions affected those around him. Basson was described as an objectively ugly man. He had dark hair, deep-set brown eyes, and he was of average height and build. When he was around 17 or 18, his father suffered a short illness which resulted in his sudden and untimely death. Before the death of his father, however, Basson, he sort of calmed down in terms of his criminal behavior, and his relationship with his family was on the mend. However, when his father died, family and friends, they noticed that he didn't really react as one would expect someone to react when their father has passed away. He showed absolutely no emotion. He wasn't bothered by the death of his father, which one can say that everybody grieves differently, and this might just be the case. However, like I said, the relationship with his family was getting better at this time, so you would expect for him to show a little bit of care for the fact that he just lost a significant male role model in his life. Although he wasn't emotionally moved by the death of his father, it did turn out to be sort of the catalyst for his later crimes. As the oldest male in the house and now the head of the household, when the insurance money for his father's death, when that came in, he basically became in charge of the family finances. The death of his father led him to pursue what would be his profession and basically his modus operandi, and that is insurance fraud. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, money lending was a pretty easy and lucrative business venture, so Basson decided that he wanted to get in on this. So what he would do is that he would lend people money, and as a retainer for this money that he would lend them, they would have to take out life insurance policies and list him as the beneficiary, just in case the unexpected happened, to guarantee that he would get back his money. So there was actually nothing weird about what he was doing. There was nothing illegal. It was pretty common business practice. And as long as the unexpected didn't happen, then the life insurance policy would lapse and Basson would get his money back from the people that he lent it to. As is expected, family are usually your first clients in a new business, and it was no different back in the 1900s. In 1901, at the age of 21, Basson started this new business venture of his by taking out small life insurance policies for himself, his mother, as well as his younger brother, Johann. There's no mention of a life insurance policy for his sister. There's actually no mention of anything about her from here on out. So I'll just assume that either she had passed away or she had been married off by this time. Like I said, there were 3 life insurance policies out for his mother, himself, and his brother Johann. But there was as well a 4th life insurance policy, and that was for his youngest brother Jasper for the amount of £3,500. £3,500 doesn't seem like a lot of money, but this was back in the 1900s. In 2018, £3,500 would be equivalent to £422,586. In South African rands, that is over 7.8 million rands. Quite a large sum of money, quite a significant amount of money. For the rest of this video, the amounts that I'll be stating will be in pounds, just for ease, because every figure that was stated in the articles that I read was in pounds. I believe at this time South Africa was still under British colonial rule. £3,500 for the youngest member of the family, it's a lot of money. But Basson reasoned that this amount was actually to Jasper's advantage, because in later years, Jasper would be able to borrow against the accumulated sum in the policy. Within a few months of taking out these life insurance policies, Basson actually allowed them all to lapse. So in the event of any of their deaths, there wouldn't be an insurance payout. He wouldn't get any money for their deaths. Every single policy was allowed to lapse except for Jasper's policy, the one for the youngest brother and the one for the largest amount. In early February of 1903, he invited Jasper out on a fishing trip. Another thing about this case is that there aren't any clear dates about when a lot of these events happened. What's clear is that the main events, they happened between 1903 and 1906. So I'm not going to be stating any specific dates unless they are available. So yeah, back to February. In February of 1903, like I said, he invited Jasper out on a fishing trip. And on the 12th of February, Basson, he went ahead down to Gordon's Bay to check into the Holloway Hotel, which was owned by a Mr. Holloway. So he arrived at this hotel before Jasper did, and whilst he was at the hotel, he had a couple of conversations with the owner, Mr. Holloway, asking him about drowning incidents, about the activities of the water in the area. And owning a hotel where people frequently go fishing, Mr. Holloway just thought to himself, okay, this guy's coming out on a fishing trip, so he's just interested to know what type of conditions he might be facing. So Mr. Holloway, he didn't really think anything of Basson's questions, so he told him about a man named Roo who had recently drowned at an area called Rechte Vlei just a few weeks before Basson arrived at this hotel. Basson kept on persisting, asking about the conditions of the waters, and again Mr. Holloway, he answered him and he told him about a specific area on the waters known as Sewing Room Rock, which was notorious for its vicious undercurrents, where a lot of fishermen would go into the waters, they would be swept up by this undercurrent by another tide, and they would disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. Jasper arrived the following day in the late afternoon of Friday the 13th. The following morning, on February the 14th, the brothers set out on their fishing trip. If you are familiar with fishing, it's usually best to go out as early as possible. Like they say, the early bird catches the worm, and it's the same with fishing. You go out early, you spend quite a couple of hours out on the water to get as much fish as possible. That's exactly what they did. They left the hotel before light was out. But what was strange is that Basson was back, he was walking back towards the hotel by around 6:45 a.m. Like I said, fishing, it's a long activity. You're usually out on the water for hours on end. So it was quite strange that Basson would have left with his brother early in the morning, and then he would come back by 6:45 a.m. Another thing that was weird about this is that when he came back, he was walking back towards the hotel with 2 fishing rods slung over his shoulder. 2 fishermen saw him, they passed by him whilst he was walking back to the hotel, and these fishermen were 2 men by the name of a Mr. August Daydeer as well as a Dr. Ford. When he was passing these 2 men, he said the following: "There's been a great accident. My brother Jasper's been drowned. He was cutting bait when a tremendous wave swept him off the rocks. I heard him give a cry for help, but another wave washed over me and threw me into a gully. I spotted him once, face downwards in the water, and then he vanished from view. He did not come up again." He was very calm as he was relaying the apparent course of events to these 2 men. He didn't seem panicked, he didn't seem alarmed in any way. He pretty much stated exactly what had happened, said this very matter-of-factly, which was strange. Personally, if I had invited one of my siblings out on a fishing trip, and on this very fishing trip that I'd invited my sibling on, they drowned right in front of my eyes, I would be beside myself. I'd be inconsolable. I don't even think I'd be able to tell people 10 minutes later, oh, by the way, my brother's been drowned, this is what happened, A, B, and C. So this is something that the 2 men took note of, and another thing that they took note of is the fact that only one of Basson's trouser legs were wet. And this didn't line up with his story, because if he had in fact been thrown into a gully, you would expect that the whole of his body would be wet. But he was completely dry aside from his single trouser leg. Nevertheless, a search party was organized, and a couple of local fishermen, they took a rowing boat and they set out along the coast until they reached Sewing Room Rock. When they got to Sewing Room Rock, Basson, he pointed at the place where his brother had allegedly disappeared from, but there was no sign of a body, and in fact there was no indication that Jasper had ever even been in these waters to begin with. So after some time, the search party was called off without any evidence that Jasper had been in these waters, that Jasper had really drowned there. After this, Basson returned to Claremont, and not long after he arrived in Cape Town, he submitted a claim for the insurance policy on Jasper's life. The insurance company, they didn't immediately pay out because they found his story a little bit suspicious. So they decided to investigate. And upon investigation, they discovered that Basson had actually tried to get the barman from the Holloway Hotel to lie about the order of events from the morning of Jasper's alleged disappearance. It was an entire inquiry that was opened. They discovered that Basson was trying to get people to make false statements, that Basson was lying about what exactly had happened. And the deeper they dug with their inquiry, the more and more Basson's claim just seemed even more suspicious and even more untrue. As a result of this, the insurance company, they refused to pay out, basically accusing the family of trying to commit insurance fraud. Somehow, Basson managed to convince his mother to take this company to court, and this case was eventually heard in front of the Supreme Court of South Africa. The Supreme Court of South Africa was a superior court of law from 1910 until 1997. In 1997, the Supreme Court was dissolved when the new Constitution of South Africa came into effect, which is the constitution that currently governs South Africa today. So now, instead of the Supreme Court being the highest court in South Africa, it's the Constitutional Court that's the highest court in South Africa, and the rulings of the Constitutional Court, they are final and they're absolute. They are completely binding. The Supreme Court, it actually ruled in favor of the Bassons, meaning that the insurance company had to pay out the full amount of Jasper's life insurance policy. With the money that they got from Jasper's life insurance policy, the family was able to buy a plot of land, which I think it was a farm. It was known as the Arams, which was still in Claremont in Cape Town. Between 1903 and 1905, Basson allegedly murdered or was involved in the deaths of an additional 5 people. These people, they were his acquaintances, some of them were clients, some of them were even his friends. And every single person that died in this time, they all had life insurance policies that listed Basson as a beneficiary. A man who had been found throttled to death on Woodstock Beach had a £375 life insurance policy that was paid out to Basson. One of his friends and clients allegedly drowned while out on a sailing trip with Basson. A German couple with links to Basson was robbed and shot dead, and the body of a man named Adolf Beck was found floating in the Black River. Beck was an associate of Basson, and it is believed that Basson was responsible for his death as well. Like I said, all of these people, they had life insurance policies that listed Basson as a benefactor. And since it couldn't be proved that he was in fact responsible for their deaths or even involved in their deaths, he got the life insurance policy every single time. His insurance fraud would finally come to an end when he met 54-year-old German farmer Wilhelm Schaefer in December of 1905. Schaefer was a hard-working and frugal man who owned the farm Highlands with his brother Gottlieb on the Cape Flats, which was about 25 kilometers from Claremont. In 1905, Schaefer wanted to sell Highlands, and when Basson found out about this, he figured that he had found his golden goose. He had nabbed the scam to end all scams, and after this big scam of his, he pretty much would never need to scam again because he had his massive payday. So he approached Schaefer about buying the farm, and after some back and forth, some negotiating, they settled on a price of £1,020. So he made this offer in late December of 1905, and the following day, after making the offer to buy the farm for £1,020, they went to see Schaefer's attorney, a man by the name of Herman Hirschberg. At this meeting, Hirschberg explained that once the property had been paid for in full, all of the documents, everything, it would be transferred to Basson. It would legally be transferred to Basson. What also happened at this meeting is that Schaefer told his attorney that under no circumstances was the transfer to take place unless he himself, being Schaefer, was physically present to provide the receipt as well as to sign off on the documents. Schaefer told his attorney that under no circumstances was the transfer to proceed unless he being Schaefer, was physically present to provide proof of payment and to sign off on the documents. Like I said, he was a frugal man, and as well as being frugal, he was wary of scams, and rightly so. A few days after this meeting, Basson went back to the attorney's office to try and get him to transfer the property to his name. Obviously, this didn't work because there were strict conditions as to how this transfer would take place, so it obviously didn't work. But somehow, Basson managed to convince himself that he would be able to, I guess, outsmart the attorney and get the property into his name without doing things the way that they had agreed to have them done. A week later, Basson returned to the attorney's office for a third time, stating that the transfer could now proceed because he had paid Schaefer for the property and he was ready for the transaction to be processed, but the attorney refused. And at this time, Basson didn't even provide any proof of payments. He just brought his word of mouth that he had paid the farmer and it was time for the transaction to take place. But because of the strict conditions that had been put in place, the attorney refused. Although he didn't process the transaction, Hirschberg did agree to get the necessary documents in order for signature. And as well as doing this, he also gave Basson a copy of a couple of draft documents that he could use to substantiate his application for a loan of £500. In early January of 1906, Basson returned to the attorney's office once again. But this time he did bring along a receipt, and that was a receipt for £1,020, again stating that he had paid the farmer in full and he would like for the transaction to proceed. Hirschberg wasn't very comfortable with this, so he did not want to process the transaction, and he refused to process the transaction. What is also interesting is that at this time, Hirschberg had power of attorney, so if he wanted to process the transaction, he very well could have, but he decided not to. And he stated that unless he himself spoke to Schaefer, there was no way that he was going to process this transaction. And at this, Basson told him that he wouldn't be able to contact Schaefer because earlier that morning, Schaefer had left for a trip to Kimberley. And after stating this, he pulled out a check for £850, which he claimed was from his mother for the purchase of the farm. Him pulling out this check did the exact opposite of what Basson was expecting to happen. I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but it didn't do what he thought was going to happen, I guess. Because instead of cementing the fact that he had paid Schaefer for this farm, it pretty much proved that he hadn't paid Schaefer for the farm. Because if he had paid Schaefer for the farm, why would he still have the check in his possession? The check that was supposed to be used for the payment of the property. So at this point, Hirschberg, again, he refused to process the transaction, and he kicked Basson out of his office. At this point, it was clear that his well-planned scam, it wasn't going to pan out. So, like any reasonable, level-headed serial killer, he reasoned that the only way that he could salvage this plan was if he murdered Schaefer, hid the body, and forged his signature on any necessary documents. And as soon as he got back to Claremont, he started putting this new plan into action. He had a large pit dug in the yard of the Aarons where he lived with his mother, and he told his family that the pit was being dug for pipes that were going to be used to improve the drainage system. And he also told them that because he hadn't gotten approval to dig this pit, it all had to be done under the cover of darkness at night and in secret. He then bought 2 bags of lime, which he hid in the hen coop. Lime is really effective in preserving the body and slowing down decomposition. and it also helps to mask the smell of decomposition. After all had been prepared, Basson invited Schaefer to Clermont, and in mid-January, Schaefer set out by horse to see him at the Ahrams. On his way to the Ahrams, Schaefer stopped by Herbert Hawkins' blacksmith shop in Lansdowne Road and asked for his horses to be shoed as well as for some minor repairs to be made to his carriage. He told the shop owner that he would be back for his horses in a few hours after he collected money from Pierre Basson for the farm that he had sold to him. He then went the rest of the way on foot. At the Ahrams, Schaefer was met by Basson and a friend of his named Tobias Lowe. It's not exactly clear what happened at this point, but what can be confirmed is that there was chloroform as well as alcohol involved. The two men overpowered the farmer, which was now easy to do in his state, and they strangled him to death with a cord. Basson kept the body hidden inside his room until nightfall. Then later that evening, when everyone was asleep, Basson and Lowe, they carried the body out and they threw it into the pit that had previously been dug in the yard. It had been a few hours since Schaefer had left his horses at the blacksmith's shop, and the blacksmith was quite concerned because he knew that Schaefer wasn't the type of person to do this. So the following morning, he rode out to the Ahrams where he was met by Basson's mother. When he got to the Ahrams and he was asking about Schaefer's whereabouts, the mother told him that as far as she knew, Schaefer had left the previous afternoon and he had actually gone to Kimberley. Again, the blacksmith found this very odd that Schaefer would leave his property with him overnight without saying anything, and he would go all the way to Kimberley without making mention of the fact that he was leaving, because like he had said to him earlier, he was supposed to come back in just a couple of hours. Nevertheless, the blacksmith went back to his shop. Even though he was confused by this, the blacksmith, he went back to his shop thinking to himself that Schaefer would just come back later in the day or whenever he returned from Kimberley to collect his property. Not long after he returned to his shop, however, Basson arrived and told him that Schaefer's possessions now belonged to him because he had paid Schaefer for them, and since they were part of the property that was sold under the farm and he had paid Schaefer for the farm, they were now his property. He produced a receipt of £1,020 paid for the repairs for the horses and the carriage, and he left with them. There are a couple of conflicting reports again about the dates of all of this happening, but what was mentioned is that the receipt that he produced was actually from the 11th of January. And this is something that the blacksmith found very odd because he knew Schaefer, and he knew Schaefer was very wary, he was very frugal, and he wasn't the type of man to predate a receipt. The previous day when Schaefer had brought his horses and carriage to be shoed and repaired was actually the 20th of January. So again, he found this very, very strange. And being that he hadn't seen Schaefer in all this time, he decided to report this to the police. Report Schaefer's disappearance, that is, to the police. A few weeks after Schaefer's disappearance, Inspector Easton, Detective Head Constable Walker, Detective Sergeant Bree, and two other detectives arrived at the Ahrams. When they arrived, they went directly to the hen coop and they started digging. To understand how exactly they knew where to dig in order to find Schaefer's body, we need to go back, and we need to go back to the night of Schaefer's murder. With the cover of darkness on the night of the murder, Basson and Lowe were not as careful as they thought. See, their murder did in fact have a witness, and that witness was a black woman who was employed as a cleaner in the area. Just as the two men hauled the body out of the house, she was passing by and she heard some suspicious sounds as well as saw a dim light coming from the yard. Initially, she thought that someone was trying to steal Basson's chickens, so she decided to get closer and investigate further. Through a small crack in the wall, she saw something that she did not expect to see at all. What she saw was two men lifting the body of a third naked white man and throwing it into a large pit in the ground. And then she heard Basson exclaim, "Give me the lime." She was a black woman in South Africa in 1906, so understandably, she did not immediately go to the police for fear of being arrested for no reason. It would take almost a month and a newspaper article detailing Schaefer's disappearance before the witness had the courage to come forward and tell the police what she knew. She sent an anonymous note to the head of the Criminal Investigations Department in Claremont, and it said the following: "Go and search Mr. P. Basson's fowl run for the missing man. Dig the grown-up Heatherton Avenue for Mr. Schaefer, the missing man." She waited for a response in the newspaper, for police to make some sort of announcement, for people to start gossiping in the streets, something, absolutely anything. But after she had sent this note, nothing happened. So she wrote a second note, this time with more detail, and it read, "Sir, this is the whole story of the missing man, Mr. Schaefer. The first notice I send was for the police to know that the missing man is on the property of Mr. P. Basson in his fowl hock under the floor, and there is a lot of sand on the top. Not the hock, but where they sleep in." Finally, when the police received the second letter, they acted immediately. They went directly to the Aarons and they started digging up the hen coop. When the police arrived, Basson, he immediately went to his room, pretty much hiding in his room, and after a couple of minutes, his mother came to check up on him to see what was going on, and when she knocked on his door and came inside, he gave her a kiss on the cheek and he told her, "I'm going to get dressed for the police. I have done no wrong. It was Toby's show." However, only moments after his mother left, Basson put a gun to his head and he committed suicide. Basson was never tried for his crimes, but a few weeks after the discovery of Schaefer's body, Lowe went on trial for murder. He was later acquitted, however, as there was insufficient evidence. On the 1st of March, Mrs. Basson was also arrested. She was remanded in Rowland Street Jail for about a week, and then she was released. After Pierre's death, the Aarons and its contents were sold by a public auction that attracted over 1,500 people. And obviously everything that ended up getting sold there was sold way above its value, possibly because of the amount of media attention that this auction, as well as this case in general, attracted at the time. In 1906, Basson was posthumously convicted for the murder of Wilhelm Schaefer. There is no indication of whether he was posthumously convicted of any of the other alleged murders that he had convicted, but at least there was some form of justice served in his case, even if it was after his death. Basson was very different compared to the other serial killers that I've covered on this channel. Unlike Moses Sithole, Stuart Wilken, Gert van Rooyen, and Joey Harhoff, his crimes, they didn't have any sexual connotation. There was no sexual motivation behind his crimes. None of his crimes were fueled by passion, but rather purely by greed. Like I said, there was no sexual element to his crimes. He never killed in a fit of rage. He never killed to fulfill some form of childhood longing. He killed solely because it made him money. His crimes were ultimately devoid of passion, and they were only committed to further his greed. That is the end of this case about South Africa's first ever documented serial killer, and as such, it's also the end of this video. If you found this video interesting and you want to see more videos like this, you can let me know by giving this video a thumbs up, as well as subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for being so patient with me over these last few months with my upload schedule, as well as like my videos not being what they're supposed to be, I suppose. So I'm really grateful to every single person that has watched this video, to every single person that has subscribed to this channel. It means so much to me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again in the next one. Bye.